Hello and welcome back to another episode of Critical Reactions with your host Bryan. We're going to wrap up today with a special selection, which is where one of you tell me exactly what it is I need to check out. Today's special selection comes at us from Anonymous. Been spamming this album since I found it, also my next pick for album review. Tons of musical storytelling in the album, but this opening track is one of the more cohesive on the album. We're going to be looking at the band Azure, who we've had on the channel a couple of times in the past. Definitely some really strong prog rock. If you've heard them before and you enjoy prog rock, you probably love what they're doing. A little bit of a modern take on it, but definitely lots of inspiration from the prog greats. We're going to be checking out the first track of the album, I suppose, called The Azdinist, Den of Dawns. Let's dive in and see what Azure is bringing to the table today. Yeah, polyrhythm on the piano, very slick riff on the guitar. Is that a harp in the background? Solid 4/4, but very interesting syncopations. Very soaring, very free is the term, I suppose. Oh, yeah. Oh, I'm digging this. Kind of R&B-ish. Very syncopated, powerful vocals. Wonderful layered atmospheres. Theatric vocals. Oh, dang, the falsetto. Shifted to a 3 somewhere along the lines. Oh, back to 4? Interesting. That's a 3 again. So just seamlessly moving between 3 and 4 full sections. A little bit of grit at the beginning of that. That section was in 7. Someone correct me. It was not 4/4 though. The bass, absolute beast here. Very fun rhythm. I think that last section was using something very close to the stereotypical anime intro chord progression. It captured that perfect sense of like adventure and melancholy. Melancholy is the wrong word, but like longing, adventure and longing. That piano line off on the right. Funky bass. Wow. Wow. And I assume that goes into the next track. What in? Yeah, as far as cohesive tracks, I think this is the most I've heard thus far. I think it's only the third track, though, that we've listened to. They definitely can be a bit all over the place, much in the same vein as some of the 70s greats like Genesis and Yes, and they like to play music that fits the moment. And if the moment changes, the music changes too. I'm more of the music telling the story rather than the music giving the emotion of the story through the lyrics. That's just a personal thing right there. It's one of the reasons that some prog rocks can bounce off of me, though. And Azure has been in that area before, but this song feels rather cohesive. Every section seems to move into the next fluidly. Sometimes that is a stark, a harsh transition. Just we were doing this, now we're doing that. But at least the emotional elements, the chord progressions, there's some things that are tied over from the last section that even if the transition is rough, the ideas still feel connected. And that is a place where I think this song in particular shines for Azure. It's sort of creating this 6-minute single focus session. And I personally really enjoy that. This song is just excellent. On the other hand, though, aside from narrative connectivity, this song is just a fantastic display of skill. Is there a single instrument in here that I didn't call out? I don't think so. Whether it was an ornamental idea like the piano or the harp, not just being very perfect in timbral choice, but also having interesting lines on the outskirts of the song, or even sometimes at the forefront of the song. Even though the harp was typically pushed off to the left, it still had a lot of presence in the mix. So yeah, praising instruments like that, but even looking at the core rock band's makeup, the bass had some really excellent lines. We had that funkiness at the end of the track. I got to point out the guitar chords, the guitar runs, the guitar riffs. It's just the guitar does cool things all the time. The vocalist, man, we had some really low notes down here. We had some belts way up there. It's just tons of range. The vibrato was excellent. The pitch is perfect. Geez, every time. The dude just has fantastic notion for, there's like very little, if any, slide into any notes. Everything is pinpoint, hitting exactly what he wants. Phenomenal. The drummer, dude, a lot of polyrhythmic drumming on this. There's a couple of places in here where there's some more raw, aggressive, like endurance skill. a couple of sections with some like 16th note bass kicks and stuff like that. But for the most part, it is very dexterous, melodic, semi-melodic drumming with a lot of polyrhythmic components. There's a lot of stuff. You listen to the cymbals, they're usually never in the same time signature or time feel as the snare or the bass kick. It's all over the place, and sometimes they're even in their own world where the drums are cohesive, but they're polyrhythmic against the guitars or against the vocals. Just phenomenal, excellent stuff. There's so many places in here where my first notion as soon as we enter into the section is, hey, where's one? It's like the first thing that pops up in my head. I got to figure out the time signature before I start paying attention to anything else. Everybody is I mean, dude, we talk about on album reviews, right? Opening tracks, what it means to start an album off. There's a lot of ways to go about doing it. This, though, is one of my favorites. You bring the audience in immediately. You show them what's up, and they have a chance to understand what the band's doing. If you've heard this, you understand Azure, at least based off of the other two tracks I've heard from them. This is Azure, at least at this album. I don't know if they have another. Regardless if they do or don't, though, this is them presenting what this album is going to be. Everyone's chops are on display. There's no question, oh, is the bassist going to improve over this? We're going to get a little spotlight on the drums? Nah, dude. The instrumentation, the composition, the performance, everything is top-notch right here. You are getting unfiltered, pure Azure music. On top of that, though, it also, to me at least, appears to showcase exactly who they are in the way that if you enjoy this, you have a whole album ahead of you that's going to be phenomenal. If this isn't your cup of tea, you can immediately duck out. Maybe give it another track just to confirm, but, me already knowing how some of their other songs sound like, this is it. If you don't like this, you can bow out. You can duck out. The rest of the album won't be for you. As far as I anticipate, there's not going to be any wild changes to this formula. Maybe some interesting sections, maybe some instruments that weren't in this one. They really like their orchestration and larger instrumentation use. So maybe there's little things like that, but I mean, if this wasn't your cup of tea, and I'm a real big fan of that. Tell me what I'm getting into from the start. We can save everybody's time that way. And this is just a really strong start to an album. Now, harmonically, this is interesting. I never really picked up on this on other tracks of theirs, although the harmonic and emotional feeling of this track is pretty much on par with what I expect from them. It's very free. It feels like you're constantly soaring. There are no restrictions or limitations. It's just very light and energetic and, again, like flying. It's that sort of freedom that the chord progression always seems to embellish. Something about this song just feels very carefree. And what clicked with me on this one, there is, and I forget I want to say it's the royal chord progression, but I am probably misremembering that because that word makes no sense. At least as like my definition of that word compared to the chord progression I'm describing. But it really picked up steam in Japanese music, particularly anime intros really latched onto this at some point in time, and this sense of like mixing longing with adventure and freedom and high energy, upbeat kind of feeling. This chord progression, if it's not the exact chord progression that permeates so much of anime's intro tracks, then it's very close, but it captures the same vibe. And I gotta go look this up. I've watched like 3 videos about this chord progression because I was really curious about it one day. I was like, hey, this sounds like an anime intro. And I was like, wait, why? What is it about this song that sounds like it? So I went and looked it up. Or somebody sent me a video, one of the two. And dang, it's just, I went down a rabbit hole and now the term is slipping my mind. There's a name for this chord progression. And I think Azure's using it. And it's phenomenal too. I think it works really well in this capacity when you pair it with the vocalist who just absolutely has the chops to soar with the chord progression. When you pair it with the instrumentation, the brightness of the guitar, the piano, the harp. I don't even know if it was a harp, honestly. Some sort of bright plucked string instrument. If anyone knows, let me know. My best guess is a harp on that. It all is bright. Even when we have a bit of a dark push, I think at like 3.5 or 4 minutes into the track, we kind of brought the brightness down and introduced a little bit of grit to the chord progression. It immediately made me think of when like Frost introduced darker ideas into their music because they also generally have a brighter sound to them. Um, and it's a moment like that that even when they go for something darker, it's still comparatively bright. It still has a lot of positivity to it, and it still feels very open. What I love too, just noticing this right now, you look at the vibrancy of the album art. That's what the music feels like. It's just very colorful, very energetic, very happy and safe and joyous. But the thing is, too, is it doesn't necessarily sit within those feelings. Not every part of the song feels joyful. Not every part feels uh, free, but they all have this vibrancy to it. And I don't have the vocabulary to express that. When I hear the music, I'm like, hey, this sounds free. But I think free is the wrong word. It captures the right vibe most of the time. But maybe vibrant. If you can imagine visual vibrancy as sound, I think that's a really good word for this too. And I love it. To me, it's a breath of fresh air because you can tell compositionally they are wearing their 70s prog inspiration on their sleeve. The vocals, the instrumentation, the layering, the complexity of composition, the way that they layer, the way that instruments play with each other. This is all very much rooted in that classic prog sound, but harmonically, this feels very modern. These are not the melodies or chord progressions I would expect from a 70s prog rock band. This would feel very forward facing if it had come out then. To me, it feels very modern, very like post 2000s modern, I suppose. I think there's also a little bit of pop sensibility in here, but I think a lot of that comes down to the vocal production and maybe even the R&B rhythmic element to this. Listening to the vocalist have these very poppy, sharp, syncopated sounds, especially in that opening vocal line. I mean, I'm not going to necessarily say that he's channeling Michael Jackson, but it's definitely in that same vein of bright, palatable, rhythmically syncopated vocal lines. There's something really infectious about the groove that the vocalist puts into the song alongside the polyrhythmic elements of the drums and the riffs, the accent patterns in the guitars and the bass. All of it just comes together into something that from start to finish ends up being very groovy, very danceable. I'm sure you could headbang to this if you want to. That is nowhere near my first instinct, though. I'm pretty sure I did some sort of weird shoulder shimmy to start with. That's where the song took me. Um, and so all of this feels very modern. You listen to the guitar riffs, and it reminds me of bands like Arch Echo. Is that who they are? Color Wheel? Was that the song? I think that's it. Um, with their very bright interpretation of rock with very technical proggy playing, almost pairing like math rock and modern pop sounds, more modern electronic sounds, maybe even as far as the harmonic areas and the emotions to it. And so I hear some pop in here. I certainly hear classic rock. I hear modern rock too, not necessarily modern hard rock, but modern progressive rock. A little bit of Haken thrown in there for good measure, particularly focus on the clinical production on this. It has a bit more grit than Haken typically does. I'd say Haken is almost too clinical at times, very clean sound. This has a little bit more grit, but is still heavily focused on being a clean production. Very high fidelity. And it's just a little mix of a lot of things that are creating Azure, a very unique experience in prog rock right now. I can totally understand why the people who have discovered it stick with it, like our anonymous requester today saying that they've continuously spun this album over and over and over. A lot of people I've talked to on the Discord server, once they get into Azure, they don't leave it. It's putting a fresh spin on a lot of sounds that people enjoy. And I don't think you can understate that. I don't think you can overstate that. However, you can't state it. You can't do that. It's really it's a pattern that I've continued to see. Very rarely have I found a prog head find Azure and not get obsessed with it for at least a week. I'm excited to get to the album whenever we do that. Primarily because I've enjoyed what I've heard, although I do have a couple of reservations about it. I do think it's going to click a lot of buttons for me, but yeah, there's going to be a couple areas where I think we're not going to see eye to eye. But, we got to get to the album to see that. And maybe by the end of the album, everything pulls together for me anyways. Regardless, I think that's all I need to say about this. It is an excellent track. I am so glad I got to hear this. I kind of hope I forget it by the time we check out the full album. But at the same time, it'll be nice to revisit it and have it as a nice little memory jog to kick the album off before we dive into the rest of it. Whenever that happens, of course. All right, let's hit some lyrics on this. I feel like this is where I always get tossed around. If I remember correctly, the lyricist can be can dance around with figurative speech and metaphors in ways that just right over my head. Let me check it out. All right, I must have been thinking of a different lyricist, different bands, or maybe just a different song entirely went into that direction. This is very straightforward, though. It's almost written as if it were a book, which, if I recall correctly, either a book was developed from this concept album or the concept album was developed from a book. Either way, there is a very large world and lore going on here. What I enjoy about this is there are a lot of stanzas to this, a lot of words, more so than I think most bands would put into a 6-minute song. But one of my big complaints with more ambitious lyrics is how vague rock and metal can be. Sticking with the verse, chorus, bridge pattern, you have 4 stanzas to tell a story. That's one of the nice things I like about Azure is that they make sure everything is crystal clear. They spend enough time on everything without hyper-focusing on anything that doesn't need repeated or focused on. In a sense, reading these stanzas here isn't that much different than reading a poem. It's a linear story told piece by piece with no focus on repeating anything not important. In fact, there is a chorus. I don't know if it is a chorus musically, but it is a repeated stanza, and it's done at the end just to focus on the decision that our character has made. Everything else, linear writing. For instance, let me start this off. First 3 stanzas, I'm just going to do back to back. You can see how this flows. Deep in the ruptured jungle where the river dives and dies, it's a simple cabin where a lonely scholar hides, and she's lost in study on the night before a storm when an arcane letter slides in beneath the door. Wait, O deliverer! Too late, not a remnant in the mist, so the scholar uncoils the parchment in her fist. Dear Fim Salo, ever closer to the truth, I can lift the power that rests inside of you. Young but awake, a destiny ever calling after her, a runaway Delayan girl, cataloging creatures and hereafters. Everything gets laid out really easily. We have somebody who is a scholar who lives in the jungle by herself. She gets a letter. When she rushes out to see who delivered it, they are gone. She reads it and it says that there is a power inside her that someone else could help her reach. And then it describes her as someone who ran away from her hometown and sits here cataloging creatures, so being a scholar. That there's a destiny calling after her, but she will sit here. It's all laid out plainly and clearly. It reads like a story. I really like that. It does have rhyme. It does have, rhythmic cadence to it. It is still written poetically, but it comes across very straightforwardly. Now, there are 15 more stanzas. I'm not going to read all of them, but the general gist of it is that she reads more of this letter, and it speaks about this place called the Den of Dens, that the person who sent it is the Azdinist, or the mistress. And she says if you go there, um, that there's power promised, and that you will belong there. But Fim, the protagonist, doesn't believe it, kind of chalks it up as just folklore, calling the Den of Dens no more than an institute of lies, almost trying to deny this entire thing is nothing more than a hoax, of course. But there is a feeling of destiny that boils up within her. She says that she's disinclined to believe the Azdinist telling of a shattered sword scattering the glass blade into the world. The Azdinist tells her to seek out the shards. Now here I'm not quite sure what happens. We seem to have some sort of chant. It says, here in the Cuth realm of eternal dawn, we trust in the Azdinist to bring us the one, to seek out the paladins of the umbral sword. We wait with an offering for the day you come. And then there's a back and forth where that's repeated, but at the end of each line, there's a new line. Here in the Den of Dawns, we trust in her to bring us the one umbral sword on the day you come to us. And this sort of like chanting thing going on. I don't know if this is just a flash over to this Den of Dawns, or if Fim actually goes here and sees this, and that's why we're hearing about it. Because right after this, it returns to here in the jungle. I can't make up my mind. I lie awake in the sweat of a dream. The Azdinist speaks of the Den of Dawns, promising power, and says I belong. I was a gatherer of truth, now I ruminate on the absurd. The Azdinist speaks of the Den of Dawns, but I'll stay right here till something occurs. So they choose to not follow this this destiny, not to go get their power, which is, I mean, that's like the first step in the hero's journey, is to turn down the call of adventure. Is that what it's called? So, I mean, this is like hero writing 101 right here, but I wonder if they're going to subvert it by the end in some way, or if they're just going to run through the hero's journey as it is, which isn't a bad idea. It's a really good template. It's worked for a lot of media. But I do think it's interesting that pretty much right here, song one, to deny the call of adventure. And that's what's going on here. It's interesting that the whole song takes place in one place, one moment. We do have the mind going in a lot of directions. What if she's right? What if she's wrong? Obviously, this is just fake. This stuff doesn't even exist. So maybe a lot of the musical movement is her emotions, her thinking things through. Maybe her mind saying, this would never happen to me, while her gut saying, but you won't know until you try. But then there is that one jump over to the Den of Dawns, and I'm not sure if that's just a scene cut or if Fim actually goes there and sees it. But that's the only real different part to the song. And I got to go back and listen to it again, or maybe I'll just wait until we do the album review. I'm curious if at that moment, that's when the music changes to one of the darker feelings that I had in there. It would make sense to have a different atmosphere for that, since it no longer is the journey where this person feels safe and calls home and does their scholar work. A drastic visual departure met with a drastic sonic departure. That would make sense to me. But that's something I'll figure out next time. For here, though, these are my thoughts on Azure's The Azdinist Den of Dawns. What did you think of this? Did you enjoy it? Is there anything that stood out to you? Anything that you would like to add on to what I said or correct me on? Maybe you have your own interpretation of things. Please let me know down in the comments section. You can also add any other thoughts you might have about this. Above that, in the description box, link to Linktree. I think it's at the bottom of the description box. You click it, it takes you here. You can find links to my music, ways to support the channel, a link to the Discord server, and so much more. Above that, if you could, like, subscribe, and ring the bell, I'd greatly appreciate all three of those. Alright, that wraps it up for today. I'll be back tomorrow, though, 5 p.m. Eastern Standard Time, 9 p.m. UTC as usual. Until next time, remember to be critical, not cynical, of the music you listen to, and have a fantastic morning, afternoon, or evening, whenever you choose to watch my videos.